At first, the storm came as a pale bruise along the northern horizon. A smear of cloud stretched thin over the gray waters. The ship rolled beneath Wolfred's boots, groaning as the wind pushed against its broad sides. The cold cut through Wolfred's clothes, through the seams of his armor, until it felt as though winter had run its fingers across his skin. "I am sick of this cold," he said through chattering teeth. Alba stood near the prow with one hand clenched around her staff, her short white hair thrashing wildly around her face. She stared at the horizon with a smile, enjoying the bitter cold as though it were a mere breeze. "You think this cold is bad? Just wait until we reach Frostland." Elias stood a few paces behind her, spear in hand, his long black braids stiff with frost. He had been silent for nearly an hour, and that was usually a sign that his mind was working through every possible contingency. "I've heard tell of the horrors of the north," Elias said with his arms crossed. "Who knows how much worse it has gotten since Dark Lord Gorgath took over." "He's dead now," Alba said flatly. "Now, we only have to worry about capturing the Necromancer. That should be easy." "Don't speak so soon," Wolfred interrupted. "Elias is right. We don't know what we will encounter in this hellish cold." Captain Gorn bellowed orders from the helm, his beard crusted with snow, his thick coat snapping around him like the wings of some great black bird. Snow slammed sideways across the ship. The sea rose in jagged, black-backed waves, each one crowned with white foam that froze almost as soon as it broke. The world shrank to wind, ice, and the thunder of waves hammering the hull as the Guardians hung on for their lives. Wolfred clutched the pommel of his sword as he wrapped a thick rope around his torso. "Hopefully, we don't end up shipwrecked like the last time. Don't speak such things into existence," Elias shouted over the roars of the waves and wind. "This is no ordinary storm," Alba shouted back. Wolfred wiped ice from his eyelashes and staggered toward her. "You don't say? Pray that we live to see the other side of this storm." Alba lifted her staff, frost gathering around its head in a pale glow. She closed her eyes, and for one heartbeat the storm seemed to hesitate around her, as though recognizing one of its own. Then the wind struck harder, shoving her backward so violently that she slammed into Elias behind her. Alba's eyes opened, sharp and furious. "I feel like someone is trying to keep us away from Frostland." "By controlling the storm?" Wolfred asked. "Who has such power? Certainly not the Necromancer." Elias had a grim expression as he shook his head. "I think not. Drakmar has only shown us power over the undead and black lightning, but there is much we don't know." "It doesn't matter," Alba said, her brow furrowed. "I won't let us sink. You have me on your side after all." The ship lurched. A sailor cried out as a barrel broke loose and slammed into the rail. Captain Gorn wrestled the wheel with both hands, his boots planted wide on the deck, his jaw set like iron. "Reef the sail," he roared. "Tie down anything that moves, and pray over anything that does not." The storm drove them through the night. Alba used her frost power to dull the storm's blows to the ship, protecting the scurrying crew behind her as best she could. By dawn, the world had gone quiet. The ship sat trapped in a field of broken ice, its hull wedged between frozen plates that groaned and shifted under the weight of the gray morning. In front of them was an endless white stretched beneath a colorless sky. "Frostland," Alba said, her words a whisper on the dying winds. Captain Gorn came to the Guardians with a rolled map tucked beneath one arm. "We are 30 miles from where we should have made landfall," Gorn said, "and lucky it is not worse. Thanks to the wee lass." He gave Alba a wink. Alba's shoulders sagged with exhaustion, but she managed a small smile to the captain. Her expression darkened as Gorn spread the map across a crate. The parchment snapped in the wind until Elias pinned one side with his spear butt and Wolfred held down the other with his hand. "You have two choices," Gorn said, pointing with one thick finger. "First, you take a 130-mile trek to the Ice Mountains. From there, you cross the Izar Glacier another 100 miles to the fortress." "That sounds terrible," Wolfred said, shaking his head. Gorn moved his finger across the map. "Second, you go 180 miles across the Fellrock Basin, then cross the 100 miles of Giant Storm Pass. That road leads straight to the Frostland's capital city, where the fortress lies." "And that sounds worse," Wolfred said, his lips tightening into a thin line. "It is more direct," Elias said, studying the map. "We wouldn't have to trek through the mountains. I'd rather avoid as many unnecessary encounters as possible." His brow furrowed. "We must get to Drakmar quickly and report back to King Leonard." "It is more exposed," Gorn replied. "The basin is open country. Nothing to hide behind. Nothing to warm you. and Giant Storm Pass earns its name honestly. A strange silence followed that. The wind slid over the ice with a thin, whispering sound. Elias looked at Alba. "You know the land better than any of us." Alba's jaw tightened as the wind picked at her white hair. "I knew it once." Wolfrid heard the pain beneath the correction. It was a pain she often hid behind her sarcastic humor. She let out a deep sigh. "I'd rather take our chances with the ice shelf. It is more familiar to me." Gorn rolled the map halfway and nodded toward the ice. "I can get you sled dogs and guides. You will not survive either road without them." Alba looked past him, toward the endless white, where her homeland waited like a memory buried under the snow. By midday, their sled dogs and guides were ready. Durian was broad-shouldered and quiet, with a face weathered by cold and old age. Fenrir was leaner, sharp-tongued, and wrapped in so many furs he looked half wolf himself. Eva was younger than the other two, though her gaze had the calm confidence of someone who had survived more winters than most men survived horrors in the snow. The dogs were restless, powerful creatures with thick coats and bright, intelligent eyes. They barked and stamped in the snow, eager to move. Their ivory tusks glistened in the sunlight. Their breath rose in white plumes. Eva looked over the guardians, pausing longest on Alba. "You are Frostling," she said in the thick accent of the Frostlands. "I was," Alba said. Eva nodded, as if that answered more than it should have. "Then you know the creatures we may encounter on these lands." Alba gave her a quiet nod. "The journey will not be easy. Few are those that have resisted the whims of the Dark Lord Gorgath." Durian tightened the straps on his sled. "Much has changed since Gorgath took these lands from us." "But he has been slain," Wolfrid said with a clenched fist. "Once we rid the land of Drakmar, things will get better." Fenrir gave him an annoyed snort. "There are many still loyal to the Dark Lord here. Perhaps the king will send more than 3 children the next time he notices the Frostlands." Eva gave Fenrir a harsh warning, and Fenrir said no more. Eva patted the head of her lead dog, and then called Alba to her. Eva's eyes settled on Alba's face for a moment. "You are the daughter of Anya and Henrik, no?" Alba's eyes widened, but then she looked away. "I don't remember my parents," she said quietly. Eva's eyes narrowed. "You have Anya's face." She considered her next words. "Gorgath has taken so much from our people. Anya was a good friend of mine. Perhaps, if we survive this, I can tell you about her." Alba felt a warmth surge in her chest. She had buried her desire to know more about her family and her homeland deep under hard work and study at the monastery. She did not talk about the Frostlands. Even Elias and Wolfrid had not truly known her past. "I'd like that, Eva. Thank you." They set out before the pale sun began its slow fall. The ship disappeared behind them, swallowed by blowing snow and the curve of the ice. The dogs surged forward, paws drumming over the frozen world, sled runners hissing like knives across glass. For the first several hours, the journey almost felt hopeful. The storm had weakened to drifting snow. The basin opened before them, vast and silver, the horizon so wide it made even Wolfrid feel small. Every sound traveled strangely. The creak of leather, the panting dogs, the soft command of the guides, the scrape of sleds over packed snow. "Do you remember any of this?" Wolfrid asked Alba as they rode together. Wolfrid sat in the sled with the wind whipping against his face as Alba stood at the back, driving the dogs in line with the other 3 sleds. "Some," Alba said. "Good some or bad some?" Wolfrid asked. Her mouth twitched. "This is Frostland. There is no good here." Wolfrid wanted to ask her more, but changed his mind. By evening, they had made progress. Durian found a low ridge of ice that broke the wind enough for camp. They fed the dogs, checked the harnesses, and huddled close around Wolfrid's flame that Fenrir coaxed to life with dried moss and oil. "Useful having a wielder of the flame with us," Fenrir said. The fire gave little warmth, but its light was a comfort. In Frostland, even a small flame seemed like defiance. Wolfrid held his hands toward it. "If I ever complain about Leongard's rain again, remind me of this place." Elias remained standing beyond the firelight, staring into the storm-dark distance. Eva noticed. "You sense something?" "I don't know," Elias said. "But the storm that struck the ship was not natural. If someone wanted to keep us away at sea, then what would they do to us on land?" Durian looked out into the snow. "True, but for now, eat." He shoved a bowl of hot stew into Elias' hand. "You're no good to anyone half-starved." The night deepened. The wind returned in soft, mournful breaths, threading through the ridge like whispers through a cracked door. Above them, clouds covered the stars. Alba watched the darkness beyond the sleds. Somewhere out there lay the capital, the fortress, Drakmar, the truth of what had happened all those years ago. The second day across the Felrock Basin dawned beneath a sky of pale iron. Vast sheets of ice glittered beneath the morning light like shattered mirrors, while distant ridges rose from the horizon in jagged white silhouettes. They say the Felrock Basin was created by a giant rock that fell from the sky, Alba said to Elias. It is said Gorgath had our people mine the material from the rock that fell. They used it to create their fortress and weapons. Alba twirled her staff in her hand. Supposedly, it is unlike any material found here on Terrasin. The wind swept unhindered across the barren ice, carrying with it needles of snow that found their way through every seam in cloak and glove. We will have to be more cautious then, Elias said. The sled dogs made good progress despite the cold. Their paws drummed rhythmically across the packed snow, while plumes of white breath billowed from their mouths. For several hours the journey passed in relative silence. Durian led from the front, his eyes scanning the horizon. Fenrir occasionally glanced over his shoulder, while Eva seemed to spend as much time watching the landscape behind them as the one ahead. It was Wolfrid who finally broke the silence. Does anyone else feel like we're being followed? His question lingered in the air long after he spoke it. No one answered immediately. The only sounds were the hiss of sled runners over snow and the distant moan of the wind. I was hoping I was imagining it, Eva said as she drove the dogs forward. Alba looked up from where she sat upon the sled. Her white hair whipped around her face in the wind. She turned in her seat and studied the endless white expanse behind them. There was nothing there. No figures, no movement, no sign of pursuit. Yet the feeling persisted. It crawled along the back of her neck and settled heavily on her chest. By the time evening arrived, all 6 travelers felt it. They made camp atop a broad ice shelf that overlooked a frozen valley below. As the sun disappeared, the landscape transformed into a world of silver and blue. Moonlight reflected from the snowfields so brightly that it seemed as though the earth itself glowed. The dogs were restless. Normally they would have curled together after eating, conserving energy against the cold. Tonight they paced. They whined. Their ears remained flattened against their heads as they stared into the darkness beyond the firelight. Wolfrid sat beside the small campfire he made, rubbing his hands together while trying unsuccessfully to warm them. The flames cast flickering orange light across the faces of his companions, but offered little actual heat. Across the fire, Elias methodically cleaned his spear. I don't like this. It feels as though we'll be attacked at any moment. Wolfrid snorted. Does anyone like this, Elias? Wolfrid arched an eyebrow. What's the matter? The cold getting to you? Do you wish Tamitha were here? Far beyond the campfire, something cracked in the darkness. Every dog immediately stood, their fur bristling. Durian was on his feet before the sound finished echoing across camp. His hand settled on the handle of his axe. What is it? Wolfrid whispered. Durian never took his eyes off the darkness as he strained to listen. I don't know. The answer hung over the camp like an oppressive cloud. No one slept well that night. The guardians took turns standing watch while the guides rested. Whenever one sat down, another rose. Whenever someone closed their eyes, they did so lightly. The darkness felt too alive. The wind carried strange sounds across the ice shelf. Sometimes they resembled distant footsteps. Other times they sounded almost like voices. By morning, everyone was eager to leave. The camp was broken down quickly, and the sleds were soon moving once more. For several hours nothing happened. The tension began to ease. Even Wolfrid found himself wondering if their fears had simply been products of exhaustion and imagination. Then the first roar echoed across the ice shelf. The sound rolled across the frozen landscape like distant thunder. It was deep enough that Wolfrid felt it in his chest more than he heard it with his ears. The dogs immediately stopped. Alba slowly rose to her feet. I know that sound. Shapes emerged from the swirling snow. At first they appeared to be moving hills of snow. Then Wolfrid saw the long arms, the broad shoulders, and the enormous clawed hands. Pale blue eyes glowed within faces framed by thick white fur. Their teeth were yellow spears protruding from jaws large enough to swallow a man's head whole. Yetis, Alba bellowed. The creatures charged with terrifying speed. The lead dog team erupted into panic barking as one of the monsters lunged forward. A huge hand swept downward toward the animals. Alba moved before anyone else. Frost exploded from the head of her staff, forming a dozen jagged spears of ice that shot through the air. The nearest Yeti roared as the projectiles buried themselves deep within its chest, but rather than fall, the creature continued charging. "Wolfrid!" Alba shouted. He drew the sword of sacred flame. Golden fire raced along the blade, its warm glow cutting through the blizzard like a beacon. Nearby, lightning burst from Elias's spear. The smell of burned fur filled the air as a bolt struck another Yeti square in the chest. The monster staggered backward, roaring in pain. Then, suddenly a terrible silence descended upon the ice shelf. The Yetis pursued no further. Eva's face went white. "We have to get off the ice shelf. Now." She drove her dog sled hard, and did not look back to see if the others followed. She shouted a sharp command in the language of the Frostlands, and the dogs surged forward. Durian and Fenrir reacted a heartbeat later, dragging their sleds into motion. Wolfrid, Elias, and Alba threw themselves onto their own sled as the ice beneath them began to groan. At first, the sound was distant, like thunder buried deep beneath the world. Then it grew louder. The ice shelf trembled beneath the runners. Hairline cracks spread across the surface, racing outward in every direction like blue veins beneath pale skin. "What is happening?" Wolfrid shouted. "The shelf is breaking." Durian roared back as he slowed his sled. The words had barely left his mouth when the ground split open. A deep crevasse tore across the ice shelf with a sound like the sky being ripped in half. Snow exploded upward. The dogs yelped as the sled lurched violently to one side, and Wolfrid felt his stomach drop as the front dogs slid over empty air. Beneath them, the crevasse plunged down at least 150 feet, its walls jagged with blue ice and shadow. The dogs scraped uselessly at the crumbling edge, their harnesses snapped tight. Their terrified yelps echoed from the darkness below. "Do we jump off the sled or try to crawl back onto the ice with the dogs?" Elias asked. "We can't let the dogs die." Alba screamed, offended he even suggested it. The ice cracked again beneath them. Wolfrid looked from Alba to the dogs. "Maybe if we pull all our weight to the back of the sled we can save the dogs," he said. The dogs dangled helplessly, twisting in their harnesses as chunks of ice broke loose around them and vanished into the abyss. Alba reached toward them, her face twisted with anguish. "Alba, no!" Elias shouted. She continued crawling toward the front of the sled, stretching one hand toward the nearest dog. The animal looked up at her with wild, terrified eyes. "I can save them," she said as she crawled further, Elias doing his best to balance out the weight. Wolfrid dropped beside Alba and grabbed one of the dog's harnesses as they desperately tried to pull them back onto the ice. For a brief moment it seemed they might succeed, but a deafening crack split the shelf beneath them. The ice gave way under Alba's weight, sending her sliding toward the crevasse. Wolfrid instantly caught her by the cloak just before she fell. As he dragged her to safety, the remaining ice collapsed. The dogs barked in terror as the sled broke free and plunged into the abyss below. Wolfrid slammed his sword downward with both hands, driving the blade deep into the side of the crevasse. The sacred steel bit into the ice with a shriek. His body jerked to a stop so violently that pain tore through his shoulder, but he still hung on to Alba. "No!" Alba screamed, reaching helplessly toward them, but all Wolfrid could do was hold on to her as the dogs disappeared down below. Elias drug his body to the edge and extended his hand to Wolfrid, one hand locking around Wolfrid's arm. For a moment the three of them hung there on the edge of the world. Alba looked downward. Far below, the sled lay broken among jagged spears of ice. The dogs were still. The sight hollowed her face. Her breath came in sharp, broken sounds. "No," she whispered, but this time the word was smaller. "Wounded." Almost childlike. Above them, Durian shouted their names. A rope came snaking over the edge. "Move, Elias. We will get them." Fenrir and Eva had made it to their side of the crevasse, and were crawling on their stomachs to keep from breaking more ice loose. Durian anchored the rope around his waist and drove his axe into a ridge of hard ice. "Grab it!" Eva cried. Wolfrid shifted painfully, caught the rope with one hand, and wrapped it around his forearm. "Alba first!" Wolfrid shouted. Elias lowered the rope as far as he could. Alba reached for it with numb fingers. For one terrifying moment, she missed. Then she caught hold and clung to it. Eva and Fenrir pulled with all their strength, dragging her upward inch by inch onto the ice shelf. When Alba reached the top, Eva seized her by the back of her cloak and hauled her onto solid ice. Alba collapsed, coughing hard, her whole body shaking. They did the same with Wolfrid, pulling him to safety. Wolfrid dusted the snow from his beard. At least, the Yetis aren't a problem anymore. No one laughed. The wind had returned, but it seemed distant now, muffled beneath the pounding of their hearts. The Yetis were gone. Whether they had fled before the breaking shelf or had been swallowed by some other fracture, none of them knew. Alba pushed herself to her knees and stared into the crevasse. Elias placed a tentative hand on her back. He sensed that the emotions she wore so plainly on her sleeve were not truly about the dogs, but he chose not to speak as she stared into the blue darkness below. "Come, let's pray for the lives lost," Wolfrid said as the three gathered and bowed their heads. "We don't have time for this." Durian gathered what little remained from the broken straps and scattered packs. Fenrir checked the surviving supplies with grim efficiency. Eva knelt beside the remaining dogs from the other sleds, calming them with soft words and trembling hands. After a while, Durian said what they all already knew. "We will have to remove some of the supplies to make room for Elias and Alba to ride. They are the lightest of us. With one sled gone, you cannot expect us to survive the way to and back with what we have left," Fenrir said, throwing up his hands. "And you want us to get rid of more?" Fenrir gave a bitter laugh without humor. "Would you rather walk?" Durian growled. Fenrir didn't answer. "We take only what is necessary," Elias interrupted. "We can walk as needed to not overburden the dogs." Behind them, the crevasse widened in the ice shelf like an open wound. Ahead of them, the Fellrock Basin waited beneath a sky growing darker by the hour. The supernatural storm gathered itself again, circling them with impatient hunger. Whatever force had tried to stop them at sea had found them on land, and it was not finished. The third day dawned beneath a sky that seemed determined to crush the world beneath it. Dark clouds rolled endlessly overhead, forming a ceiling of iron gray that stretched from horizon to horizon. The weak northern sun never truly rose. Instead, it lingered beyond the storm, little more than a pale glow hidden behind layers of snow and cloud. The wind had grown stronger during the night, and by morning it swept across the Fellrock Basin with such force that it carved long rivers of drifting snow through the frozen landscape. Ahead of them, Durian cut a path through the snow while Eva remained close behind him. Fenrir lingered farther back, frequently turning to scan the white landscape behind them. Fenrir had become increasingly restless since they'd lost their fourth sled. Several times Wolfrid had caught him staring into the storm with narrowed eyes, as though expecting something to emerge from the swirling snow at any moment. The feeling of being watched had lingered around them like a shadow once more. Durian raised a gloved fist, and everyone immediately halted. For several moments, no one spoke. The only sounds were the mournful cry of the wind and the steady hiss of snow sliding across the frozen ground. Durian squinted into the storm. His expression darkened. "We've been spotted." Wolfrid followed the guide's gaze, but saw nothing except endless white. The landscape stretched away in every direction, barren and lifeless beneath the storm. If enemies were out there, they were hidden well. "They don't look like a big deal to me," Alba said. She stepped forward beside Wolfrid and folded her arms across her chest. There was a stubborn confidence in her expression that reminded Wolfrid of the first day they had met. "I'm with Wolfrid." Fenrir muttered a frostling curse under his breath. Small dark shapes appeared atop a distant rise before vanishing behind curtains of blowing snow. Three figures glided effortlessly across the frozen terrain. "They're on skis," Elias observed. Before anyone could respond, an arrow slammed into the snow less than a foot away from his boot. Before anyone could move, arrows emerged from every direction, materializing from the swirling snow. "Down!" Durian shouted. The group dove behind a ridge of ice as arrows hammered the ground around them. Shafts buried themselves in snowbanks. One glanced off Wolfrid's shoulder armor, hard enough to spin him sideways. Elias peered over the ridge. His expression immediately changed. "There are more." Shapes were emerging from the storm everywhere now. Large sleds raced across the basin, pulled by teams of shaggy northern beasts. Fur-clad warriors rode atop them, guiding the sleds with practiced ease. Behind them lumbered a towering frost giant, easily 20 feet tall, his pale skin crisscrossed with scars and his beard frozen into thick icicles that swayed with each of his thunderous steps. Resting across his shoulder was a massive war club that appeared to have been carved from a tree trunk. It might as well be a walking tower. Wolfrid gasped, and I thought the Yetis were bad. But that wasn't what truly caught Wolfrid's attention. Every adult warrior on a sled had what appeared to be a child on the sled with a drawn bow. Another volley darkened the sky. The realization struck him harder than the cold ever could. They have children with them. I can't fight children. Let me have the frost giant instead. The enemy Frostlands maneuvered the sleds while the younger riders loosed arrows with frightening precision. "We fight who we must," Durian said as he pointed his axe toward the enemy. An arrow struck Durian square in the chest. For a brief moment, he simply stood there staring down at the shaft protruding from his furs. His face registered surprise more than pain. Then his knees buckled. "Durian!" Eva cried as he collapsed backward into the snow. The storm swallowed her voice. There was no time to mourn. The Frostlings were already upon them. Wulfrid drew the sword of sacred flame. Golden fire erupted along the blade as he charged. He swung upward as an enemy sled passed. Sacred fire exploded from his blade and crashed into the side of the sled. Wood shattered. The adult rider was thrown violently into the snow while the child rolled clear and disappeared into the storm. Lightning answered moments later. Elias thrust his spear skyward, and a bolt descended from the clouds with deafening force. The blast illuminated the battlefield in stark white light, revealing dozens of riders converging from every direction. Yet despite the power of fire and lightning, the Frostlings continued advancing. The storm belonged to them. Snow twisted and swirled at their command. Walls of ice rose from the ground to shield them. Wind howled around their sleds, pushing them forward with unnatural speed. Alba drove her staff into the sky. A pulse of frost energy erupted outward toward the enemy. The storm bent away from her. For a brief moment, visibility improved as she drove the snowstorm back from her and her companions. The frost giant thundered toward her. The monstrous warrior raised its club high overhead, muscles rippling beneath its thick fur armor. The enormous weapon came crashing downward with enough force to flatten a house, but just before it struck, Alba thrust out a free hand. A translucent dome of frost shimmered into existence around her. The club slammed into the barrier with a thunderous crack, while from the opposite flank Elias drove his spear forward and unleashed a blinding surge of lightning that ripped through the giant's massive frame, causing it to rear back with a roar that echoed across the frozen basin as it collapsed onto the ground. Then an arrow whizzed past Alba's ear. The shaft missed her by inches as she sidestepped. Then a sickening impact sounded behind her. Fenrir collapsed. The arrow protruding from his forehead left little room for hope. The guide fell without a word. Of the guides, only Eva remained. The realization struck all three guardians at once. Every guide who had started this journey with them was gone. Durian, dead. Fenrir, dead. Soon perhaps Eva as well. Snow rose around them like living walls. Alba gritted her teeth and shoved against the blizzard with every ounce of strength she possessed. "It's too strong," she said through gritted teeth. Wulfrid stepped beside her, firelight dancing across his armor. "Did you not survive the blast of an ice dragon? What is this in comparison?" Alba shot him a look that somehow managed to communicate both annoyance and desperation. "Defending is one thing," she said to Wulfrid, "but redirecting a blizzard is another. Even on the ship, it wasn't this strong." Then Elias did something neither of them expected. He ran straight into the storm. Alba shouted his name, but he was already gone. For several agonizing moments, they saw nothing but snow. Then lightning flashed. Elias emerged from the white chaos, dragging a child behind him. At the same time, his spear punched through the chest of an adult Frostling. The boy screamed. Has he lost his mind? Wulfrid gave Alba a horrified look. Elias seized him and turned toward the advancing sleds. "Stop!" His voice echoed across the battlefield. The sleds slowed. Elias lifted the boy higher. "Leave us be. If you don't, the boy dies." Electricity crackled around his outstretched hand. A single finger pointed toward the terrified child. "Elias, what are you doing?" Wulfrid said, horrified. "This is not the way." Elias never looked at him. "You'd rather us die?" No one answered as the enemy sleds rolled to a halt. The barbarians stared at the trembling child. A beat, and then arrows flew anew. "They don't care about the child," Alba yelled. "Let the boy go." Then, Wulfrid unleashed a wave of sacred flame. The fire spread outward like a golden tide, consuming the incoming arrows before they could reach them. "We have to move," Eva shouted. Elias left the boy in the snow as they turned and fled on the last two remaining sleds. They ran hard, and then Alba saw a dark opening in the mountainside. "There! A cave!" They ran toward it, hope stirring in their chests. The cave entrance grew larger, then the ground split apart. The fissure opened directly beneath Eva. One moment she was beside them. The next she vanished, and the dogs vanished. One more second, and Alba would have been swallowed up as well. The crack sealed almost immediately behind Eva, swallowing every trace of her existence. "She's gone," Alba shouted. The three guardians stood alone before the cave entrance while the storm raged behind them. Alba lowered her head. I guess we're on our own now. They had scarcely gone a dozen paces into the cave when mountains of snow and ice collapsed around them. Wolfred spun just in time to see an avalanche of snow and jagged blocks of ice thunder through the cave entrance. The three lunged deeper into the tunnel as the cave shook violently around them. Chunks of ice fell from the cave ceiling. A wave of snow crashed onto Wolfred's back, knocking him off his feet. Alba scrambled through the swirling waves of snow and hauled with all her strength until she burst him free. She turned to call for Elias, only to find him sprawled against the cavern wall beneath a fallen slab of ice, blood trickling from a cut across his forehead. Alba rushed to his side, relieved to find him still breathing despite the blow. At last, the echoes of the collapse faded into silence. I guess now is a good time to rest, Wolfred said as he lit his fists into flames, illuminating the ice tunnel around them. When the snow dust settled, Alba rose. I suppose so. Welcome to the Frostways of the Vaildar. We would like to thank each and every one of you for watching. If you enjoy the video and want to see more, we humbly ask that you give this video a thumbs up, share it with others, and help get it out there to more people. Please comment and subscribe. It motivates us to make more stories.